What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining me again tonight for another episode of the review here. This week we are learning about Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the Jerusalem walls. And so you might be asking yourself, like, what can we learn from the rebuilding of the Jerusalem walls? And I don't so much want to focus on that as much to focus on Nehemiah and his life and how he always went to God for help. And so the question I want to ask you is, where do you go when you need help? All right, kids, do you go to your mom and dad's? I hope you do. Do you go to your aunts and uncles? Do you go to grandmas and grandpas? Do you pray? Do you ask God for help? And that's what Nehemiah, that's what I want you guys to learn from Nehemiah tonight. It's such a cool story. And so let's dive into Nehemiah. So the story starts out, Nehemiah is in Persia. He's underneath the rule of King Artaxerxes, all right? And if you remember, the Israelites had gone to Jerusalem, and they were rebuilding the temple. And everything was kind of, they were rebuilding their homes back there. And Nehemiah was one of the ones that kind of remained behind, kind of like Esther in our story last week. So Nehemiah was a cupbearer for King Artaxerxes, and so he was very highly trusted. He was kind of, around the king. If the king, he would serve drinks and things like that, and he was trusted so much that, if someone were to serve a drink to the king, typically the cupbearer would test it first, and so they had to be highly trusted, and so that's where Nehemiah is, okay? And so the story starts out with some of Nehemiah's friends coming from Jerusalem and telling him about kind of what's going on back home. He asks them, how are things going? And they didn't bring him good news. They kind of told him, hey, the walls are still in shambles. The gates aren't being rebuilt. They're still burnt down. And so that frustrated Nehemiah, and he was sad. And so the very first, this is the very first picture of Nehemiah going to the Lord. He cries out to God, and he asks God, please give me favor in the eyes of King Artaxerxes to allow me to return home and help rebuild the walls. And so Nehemiah goes to the king, and the king realizes that Nehemiah is sad. And so he asks him, what's the matter? And Nehemiah tells him, I want to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. This is the way things are back home. And so, even in that short little period of time, Nehemiah, it says that Nehemiah kind of said a quick prayer to the Lord. And so the king grants him favor, allows him to return home to Jerusalem, and even writes letters that would grant him safety as he travels, that would allow him to cut down, timbers, lumber to help rebuild the gates and things like that. So he goes back home to Jerusalem. He's kind of looks over, kind of scouts out a plan in his mind of how he's gonna, they're gonna go about this. And then he tells the people, I want to help rebuild the walls. And everybody gets on board, and they all begin rebuilding the walls. What happens? Well, there's some enemies, all right? There's always enemies. And so the enemies try to frustrate them. They try to get them, they try to scare them into stopping build the walls. And where does Nehemiah go? Nehemiah prays to God. God, will you continue to grant us favor? Will you give us wisdom in knowing how to rebuild these walls? And so they came up with a plan to continue to build with a hammer in one hand and keep a sword, in the other hand. So they were ready to attack at any time. And they also came up with a plan because the walls of Jerusalem were huge. Okay, they were building way over there and way over there. And so if the enemies were to attack, on this side of Jerusalem, they would blow a horn, and that would be the signal for everyone to kind of go and to help out over here. And so that was the plan. And Nehemiah, through all of this, reminded the people and encouraged them, listen, do not be afraid. The Lord our God is great. And if anyone comes against us, God is going to help us. And so with that encouragement, they continued to build the walls, and they pretty much got the walls done, okay? And that frustrated the enemies even more. Now they saw that there was no cracks in the wall, there was no place to get in. And so now what are they going to do? So now they devised a plan to try to trick Nehemiah to come and visit them and meet so that they could kill him. And Nehemiah again prays and asks the Lord for strength, and obviously tells them no. And so they try 2 or 3 more times, and Nehemiah each time says no. And so they're kind of their last ditch effort was to try to pay someone on the inside to trick Nehemiah into doing something wrong so that they could kind of catch him doing something wrong and taint his reputation and get him that way. And still Nehemiah maintained his integrity. He was still a man of God, and he said no. Um, and so God helped him all along the way. And each time he knew he couldn't do it on his own strength. He couldn't lead all these people in Jerusalem to help rebuild the walls in 52 days. All right, these are massive walls, and to do it in less than 2 months is kind of crazy. And so through all of this, the enemies of Nehemiah, they realized that, and they were frightened because they knew that God must have been a part of this. Um, and so, kids, I want you to learn from this. Number one, that Nehemiah, he was a great leader. He was able to get a lot of people to follow him, but also that he trusted in God and he relied on God every step of the way. And kids, no matter what situation you're going through, whether you're frustrated or whether times are good, if times are good, then we should continue to praise God for what he's doing. If times are bad and you're going through a rough time, continue to rely on God. Pray to God for strength. Pray to God for wisdom, to give him, to help make you smart and figure it out, and don't get frustrated. Continue to rely on God. So that's the story of Nehemiah. If you get a chance, read it. It's a really cool story. Nehemiah chapter 1 to 6 is kind of where this story lies. Okay? Guys, we love you and we're praying for you. This Sunday night, we are going to have kind of a night of worship and a night of fun. We're going to have some trivia. So I hope you guys can come out and join us Sunday night, because then we get to see your faces. And so I'm going to be there. I hope you're going to be there. So come out and join us. We love you guys. See you next time.